I am attempting to introduce a segment on Slow TV. My name is Martin Flanagan. I'm being tagged by Tim Winton, but the piece is actually a conversation between us, a serious conversation. Thank you very much. Have you ever nearly drowned?
Yeah, I have on several occasions actually,
Right.
And it's pretty vivid experience actually. The first time I can remember, I was in a boat with my dad and a couple of cousins and my uncle, and we were putting cray pots out, and we were about, I guess, a mile out over the reef, and out of nowhere, it seemed to us, big set of waves just showed up. You know, this like convoy of lines on the horizon, and so quickly sort of chucked the pots and everything over the side and try and get out of the way. And because neither my father nor my uncle was a surfer, they thought that they could outrun these waves, and so we ended up, we got the first wave. I think they tried to go over, and then the second wave, it was even bigger. As you know, these things go running a kind of a weird sets, like threes or sevens. Second one was even bigger, and we were just sort of squeaking over the top, and then the third one was just so big and already starting to break. Bizarrely, instead of just going sideways to the wave and heading out into deeper water, turned around and tried to outrun it. Essentially tried to surf this huge wave, in a 16-foot dinghy and several people aboard. And very quickly, we did have that second and a half of actual surfing the wave, and then next thing I know, I'm upside down in a sort of weird pastel blue haze with bubbles, and I'm trapped up in an overturned boat, upside down, and I can remember seeing my fingernails and how sort of pearly white they were, and how pretty it all was. And I think I just got, I was at the stage where I was losing, beginning to lose consciousness. I was literally drowning, and I was all caught up in rope and fishing line and all the crap that's in a boat. And an arm came under and hoisted me out, and it was only at the moment when I hit the surface, that I understood that I was drowning, and it was, it was like the first breath I ever took in that sense. It was a scream, and there we all were bobbing around in the water, and there's the overturned boat, and just this flat sea with this sort of light frosting of after foam, if you like, and that was it. It was just the calm sea, and we're all out there, and I'm just, wailing in air, screaming my head off until I could sort of recover my dignity in front of my cousins who were older, and then we think, well, now what? But yeah, there was that. That was the first really vivid experience of almost going.
So how old were you?
I reckon I was about 10 or something like that.
And drowning, and also in your books, there's a state that seems to me that often appears, a state of consciousness, which is sort of like drowning. It's a place of fear and visions, and there's this semi-submerged thing that I find in a lot of your books.
Being sort of out on the edge.
Yeah.
Well, in extremis, I suppose. I mean, yeah, and there's a lot of. It's only taken me 30 years to realise and look back that there's a lot of drowning, literal drowning in my books, and there's a lot of almost drowning. And in fact, Cloud Street is a book, being told by someone while they are drowning.
Yeah.
And it takes him, 400 pages to drown, but some people are just hard to get rid of, I suppose. But it's a real theme there, and it's funny because no one's ever really picked up on it, given all the theses and essays and, you know, articles that get written, they're always about this, you know, the same kind of predictable themes that, you know, kids get sort of set, you know, at school, and then they imbibe, you know, even more religiously at university. And something as simple and as this, it's present in the text, I think just gets overlooked because they're hunting for the things that they think they're supposed to be looking for.
Do you get depressed or upset, as I have recently done in relation to a book of mine which is being taught, when I've seen the questions that are asked? Do you ever get upset by that? Do you find it, you know, takes your spirit a bit?
Yeah, I try not to, because you know, questions that are being asked and the way things are being taught is a bit like reviews. It's like the weather. There's nothing much you can do about it.
Yeah.
It comes, it arrives,
Yeah.
it'll leave, it'll go. This too shall pass, you know, I try and tell myself. But yeah, I mean, I occasionally get annoyed or disheartened by the way that sometimes the books are taught, and become more acutely conscious of that when your own children are having to study them in school. Yeah. So it's a sort of an extra embarrassment. You know, when it's hard enough when you meet people who have had to study you in school, and it's hard when you meet people who are literally studying you in school. But when those big eyes are looking at you and they're your children, and they're just like, what the, you know, can you believe this? It's hard, you know, it's hard, and it's but then I think, well, they are studying work of their own place and their own time, and when I was a kid, that wasn't the case. We only studied people, you know, in terms of literature, we only studied people who were, you know, decently dead, or even more decently foreign. Mm. And so every time I catch myself whinging and moaning about the fact that, you know, either, you know, the way that it can be taught, and it's often taught, you know, very well. I have, you know, had marvellous experiences where, you know, you realise that a teacher has really got onto something and found a way to the kids, and also through the book with the kids to do something interesting. But every time I whinge and moan, and I think about, you know, that the kids have got to negotiate a book like an obstacle that's been set in their path. You know, if they can get around this book or over this book or under this book and get to the piece of paper at the end, you know, at the end of the examination. You know, you don't write books as obstacles in people's paths, but in the end I think, well, they're reading stuff in their own time and own language, and, you know, there's something empowering about that. Sorry to sound sort of all sociological, but you do feel energised and thrilled the first time you read a book or see a film in a place and with people that you recognise, that you feel it's speaking to you and for you, and so I try and remind myself of that when I get all thingy about you know, the way it's taught. You know, the same old obsessions of, you know, looking for all the kind of policing the text for, you know, gender violations, policing the text for, you know, what it says about the class struggle, you know, all that kind of detritus that still, you know, is there in the teaching culture.
How much? Well, it seems to me a lot of your writing comes from the fact that you're West Australian. Why are West Australians different? I say this coming from Tasmania, knowing that Tasmanians are different for all sorts of reasons and Victorians. Why are West Australians different?
Yeah, I wonder why. I mean, unlike Tasmania, West Australia was, you know, settled at first by kind of hopeless hopefuls, and it was a real estate scam, essentially. Albany should have been the capital because it had the second best natural harbour in the continent, had an English climate. It was strategically important, but somebody came along, later on, and sold the idea of the Swan River to the Crown, and of course, you know, not being able to double check, they let them, you know. So it started in a real estate scam. People, you know, literally sold everything they had in England and came out to disappointment, to, you know, to bitterness and sadness and a sterile floodplain. You know, it was a disaster. So, you know, Alan Bond and co, you know, came along in a well-worn rut. You know, the real estate scam, the sharp practice, the running away with other people's money. You know, long history of that. So there's that. And of course, you know, Swan River Colony, you know, is a miserable failure. And then at the end of the whole convict era, when everyone else in Australia is weaning themselves off the convict business, we start begging for them, you know, as essentially slave labour. And in a way, that's an early difference, I think. Obviously, the fact that we're separated from the rest of the country by, you know, several deserts, no water, no trees, different time zone.
So a sense of isolation?
Totally, yeah, completely. I mean, I'm still, even though we live in a sort of an instantaneous, you know, interconnected world, I'm still very conscious of the fact that I'm 2.5 hours from Bali and 5 hours from Sydney.
Yeah.
You know, that our ocean is the Indian Ocean, and India, you know, as I discovered, you know, when I went there, is much closer than I realised. And you know, sometimes you look west and you think you're going to see Africa. So people imagine Australia as a kind of a Pacific nation, and even, you know, our diplomats strut the world stage talking about, you know, our place in the Pacific, but only a bit of us is in the Pacific. Yeah. Your bit's really kind of the northern postcodes of Antarctica, and my bit is the Indian Ocean, and that's quite a significant geographical difference, and our closeness to Asia rather than the Pacific. But geographical isolation is, you know, really, I think it's imprinted on us. You know, you do literally feel in many parts of Western Australia the desert at your back and the sea in front of you, and just how marginal human culture in our Western form is, just how thin its roots can be, but how thin the actual literal LITTRO literal is. It's just a ribbon, and we're all there, sitting on it, contesting it, screwing it up. Yeah, I think that's a difference between us and the rest of the continent. And it's, you know, it's just a third of the continent with almost no people in it.
Yeah. And is this part of your? Do you believe this is part of your writing? This sense?
Yeah, I think I'm resigned to that fact. I mean,
it's not such a bad thing, is it?
No, not at all. No. I mean, it's in fact, I think it's given me something distinct, which I haven't sought and I haven't looked for or hoped for. But really, me coming from the other side of a big brown island, from where all the power is, where all the culture is, where all the politics are, where all the machinations of our society really happen. You know, it seems in Sydney and Melbourne, and Brisbane. If you've been there in the last 5 years at least. To be an artist, making stuff, you know, up for a living, pulling things out of the air and spinning something out of it, knowing that everything is supposed to be elsewhere. Yeah, I think that does have an effect on the way you work and how you imagine
and on your relationship with the sea.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, the sea really. The sea is obviously hugely important in the work, and in a way, I mean, that's very much more personal in a sense to me. And I've noticed it, you know, when I became a father all those many years ago, when you first put your kids into the sea, you know, and see their little bodies kind of responding. It's like they're home, and that's how I felt as a child, and probably how I feel a lot of the time now. I go into the sea and I feel at home. It's almost as though, you know, amniotic fluid's probably drawing a long bow here, but yeah, I relax. It's like, it feels, and it's not my home. Obviously, I haven't got gills. I imagine that you know, my relatives once did, but yeah, it feels, if not my medium, then it feels like a familiar enough medium in the family sense of familiar.
Have you surfed waves as big as the ones in your new book?
No.
How big's the biggest wave you've surfed?
They always seem big when you're down on the water, you know, and your heart's beating and your mouth's dry and you're wishing you're wearing your brown wetsuit, you know. But no, you know, I love being in the water. I love being around it. I love that, just the kind of fizz that it all gives off, you know, and the fact that it's alive. And you know, I do love surfing. I've done it all my life since since the 1960s, and I get an adrenaline hit just from being in the water. So I don't really need, you know, a 20-foot wave, and I'm not capable of riding a 20-foot wave, and I'm just not brave enough. You know, I just value my life too much to be risking it in that way. And when I was young and fit, I was too chicken, and then I'm old and have responsibilities, so I can't, you know. And now I'm so old that I'm just physically incapable of doing it. But in a way, the fact that I've always been a physical coward, as well as a bit lazy physically, I think I might have made up for it. This is me excusing myself to myself in front of you and rather too many people, I imagine. But I think, well, I've made my whole living, all my life, in an atmosphere of risk. I've never had a job. I'm doing something that, in terms of my class background, is alien. Most people finish school, they get the appropriate paperwork, they apply for a job, and the job has a job description and has a set of things that you're supposed to do and benchmarks, and everyone understands what that job is, even you eventually. And if you go into work every day at a certain time and complete a certain number of tasks, by and large, I mean, with varying degrees of complexity and predictability, I suppose, then you're safely doing your job and you'll get paid at the end of the week. And that's most people's existence. And that's not my existence, and it never has been. And it's taken me a while to realise that, you know, I've been engaged in putting food on the table for nearly 30 years by making things up that I don't know are there. You know, I have to literally pull things out of the air every day of my life for a living. I mean, I would do it for pleasure, and I've done it for pleasure since I was a little kid, but I do it for a living as well. And sometimes I think you know, even as an artist or a writer or any freelancer, you underestimate the stress and the risk that you're engaged in. And sometimes you can tough it out with bravado or the delusion of control, or but really you're going out there day after day after day, pulling a rabbit out of a hat.
So in terms of being a writer and being a novelist, what's the big risk for you in that?
Well, the first risk is, you know, that there won't be anything there.
Okay.
You know, essentially, like a surfer, you are sitting in the water. You know, people go past surfers, you know, drive past or you walk past, and they say, even say it to me, I don't know what you guys see in it. Every time I go past, you're just out there bobbing around, you know, most of the time. And that's perfectly true. You're just sitting in the ocean, looking to the horizon, with the expectation that something's going to show up, that the repercussions of some storm event somewhere over the horizon several days ago is going to eventually ripple out and meet you, and then you're going to turn around and ride that energy. in a perverse way, it's a bit like what it's like to be a writer. You go and you sit down with nothing, and you bob around in the sort of in the fizzing brine of your own consciousness or in your imagination, and hope something shows up, you know, across the horizon of memory, of your consciousness, of just your daily awareness. You're just hoping that something's going to show up, and that's all you've got to work with.
And how long were you waiting for this one?
I wasn't waiting. This one, I was doing something else. I was writing another book, and it wasn't going very well, and I was in a pretty gruesome state. Actually, I was just beating my brains out trying to figure out how to make this story work, and I'd lost momentum for various reasons, I think. And I just thought, I can't. I know I've had this experience before where I've decided, you know, I was going to break or break through, and in that instance, you know, I broke through and it all worked out well, but the process was so ghastly for me and for the people around me that I just realised I couldn't repeat that. I couldn't keep it. You know, it's fine. You know, risk is fine, but in the end, you just got to, you know, you've got to be smart, particularly when it involves other people. And so I just decided, no, I'm not gonna kill myself over this, and I'll solve the problem by avoiding it. And I literally the next day just to ignore the problem, to cover up the anguish, to take my mind off it, to keep myself occupied, I started another book. And it's funny, you know, sometimes you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting and nothing comes along. And sometimes you get sideswiped, you know, and suddenly there's something else. I just thought, no, gonna do this. And I just somehow picked up on something else and got swept away in it and was relieved of all the misery and anguish and depression that was, you know, haunting me about this other project. So
you had a slightly similar story with dirt music, didn't you?
Yeah, I think that's the experience that I was sort of trying to avoid talking about in a way. But yeah, I had this thing where dirt music was the reason I don't want to go back and try and, you know, break through, just to take myself out to that level of extremis to finish a book.